Edgar is such an amazing person to work with because he has such a subtle way of inviting you into the world of his genius.
Today's guest has been recommended so many times over the years, and I'm so thrilled to bring you this today. It's an epic conversation, wide-ranging conversation. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and today's guest is Rex Surany, who's principal bass of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra in New York City. What an amazing player. If you were at ISB, the International Society of Bassists Convention in 2017, he was one of the headliners, one of the evening shows. Whoa! Amazing player and a really deep thinker, as you're going to hear in this episode, and we dig into so much. From how he found himself in the Met Orchestra and also teaching with his former teacher, Hal Robinson at Juilliard. We talk about what that's like. Fascinating. His path from New Jersey and his early teachers to Domaine Forget and studying there. Talking about all sorts of those aha moments during that time. And then heading to Colburn to study with Paul Ellison and David Allen Moore, two past podcast guests. And then Curtis with Hal Robinson and Edgar Meyer, playing in the New York Philharmonic, and the switch to German bow, which is fascinating, and many people have asked about this. So we dig into all of that, as well as life in the Met Orchestra, auditions and auditions for the Met in particular, and all sorts of topics relating to what it's like playing in the Met Orchestra, what that job is like. Super cool conversation. You're going to love it. And I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Colstein Music, D'Addario Strings, Steve Swan String Bass, Upton Bass, and the Bass Violin Shop. More on them later, but let's dig into this conversation with Met Orchestra principal bassist Rex Surany. Rex Surany, good to talk to you.
Hello.
So you are many things, principal bass of the Met Opera Orchestra. You're teaching at Juilliard. Great background. It was so great to see you perform at the 2017 ISB convention. So it's great to chat with you, and just a real honor to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Tell me about your background. How did you get into music? Take me through that journey.
So I hail from Princeton, New Jersey. Actually, it's a town right outside of it called Plainsboro. And I studied piano when I was younger, but very soon after switched to bass. For those of you who don't know me, I'm 6'4" and change and about 230 something pounds right now, given holiday fluctuation.
Right.
So the bass was a very natural fit for my physique. And it's obviously a really fun, charismatic instrument to play. Let's see. I started studying bass through my school system in middle school in about fourth grade. They had an orchestra program, and one of the conductors of the program is actually a bass player. And he's a freelancer in the Trenton area or Central Jersey area. And he's a wonderful, wonderful person to work with, especially for younger persons. His name is Bob Peterson. Want to give him a shout out. He ignited my passion for music in general, but also made me understand what bass playing was and helped me understand what it would mean to me just in life in general. And then in high school, I worked with Nicholas Walker. He had just gotten back from Paris because he worked extensively with Francois Rabbath, and I guess he was in New York, living in Yonkers, still on the freelance scene and looking for a position in academia. He was also, I think, studying at Stony Brook, getting like, I guess, a musical education degree. Nicholas, I'm sorry if I got that wrong. But yeah, it was at one of George Vance's camps that he gave a recital that just, I mean, I was like entranced. I was obsessed with what he was doing and the level of play. And I mean, he's a really charismatic dude. So I guess I'm using that word a bunch, but it's the right word when you're talking about Nicholas Walker. Yeah, so my mom approached him after I was just like, oh my God, wouldn't it be so cool to work with somebody like that? Like, and you know, I was 13 years old and was super ambitious with the bass, and was still so convinced that this was the permanent and correct path for me. So mentioning this to my mom, who knew that even probably before I did. I mean, she was just like, all right, I'm gonna go out and lay some cards on the table. So she approached Nicholas and was like, all right, I can get together some moms and kids in the area where we live, again, Plainsboro, New Jersey, and you should come down and teach them. And he's like, okay. So for a while, I guess he was teaching at out of one of my friend's house. He actually mentioned this during ISB. It was funny because he actually used to do his laundry sometimes, which was like super funny. He's like, all right, hold that thought. I got to go change the laundry, but practice like this little concept, while I go, shift my laundry over to the dryer. But I mean, it had like a really personal feel. Like those lessons meant a lot to me. So anyway, he was coming down from Yonkers, and I worked with him for about 4 years. And then my senior year of high school, like big bombshell, like he got his gig at Ithaca, and he's like, I'm gonna need to go do that, but I'm gonna try to hook you up with Hal Robinson. It's gonna be fine. And I'm like, no. um, and he actually did. I was like, holy smokes! I mean, I don't think he teaches high schoolers.
Right.
He didn't. He made an exception, and I think the reason why he did was that we didn't do anything weekly. It was more like once every 3 weeks to a month, sometimes bi-weekly when he had time and he wasn't like completely swamped. But yeah, for any of you who know Hal, I mean, between raising his own kids, raising his sister's kid, being the principal of the Philadelphia Orchestra, being on the negotiating committee for many years, teaching at Curtis, playing recitals around, guest teaching in other places, and also playing records like on Joel Corrington's one of his Bottesini albums. I mean, the guy is Superman. Yeah, actually, just kind of recounting all that, it's like, whoa. I guess I need to get going on a couple things. But yeah, Nick got me into that. Got my foot in the door working with Hal. Even though it was seldom, it meant so much to me, and that led into college. I guess I spent a year at Colburn with David and Paul, and a huge shout out to the two of them. They're amazing. I did, in fact, transfer after a year, and it had absolutely nothing to do with them, and nothing to do with the school for what it is now. This is, I guess, a common question that people ask me, especially for people who are considering colleges going forward. When I went there, I think there was under 60 students there. It was very much a program in its infancy. And I guess it was just kind of a tough thing for me to make friends in like what was a very secluded area at the time. That's, I guess, in short, why I was kind of, eyeing Curtis still after not getting in my first try. Which, for those of you who are considering to try again to get into Curtis, I say always, 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 always. But yeah, and I want to give also a huge shout out to all the gang at Domaine Forget, which, by the way, was the place where I met Paul Ellison and David Moore and all these other people like Jean Michon, Etienne Lafrance, Ali Yazdan Farr. The list goes on. I mean, like Sebastian Dubé. There's so many people I met there. Even mentioning them doesn't really do the justice of like how much those summers meant to me. But they're excellent. That's a really like great place to go. I feel enriched we'll
Hmm.
say. But anyway, that's a short description of why I only spent a year at Colburn. It's very different now, teaching faculty included, and I don't really have any reservations about recommending people go there, especially because it's completely free,
Right.
from what I understand.
Yeah.
So, but I only did spend a year out there, and I loved the time I spent with David and Paul. But I did spend the next 5 years after that at Curtis with Hal and Edgar, and I mean, it means so much to me that they took me the second time I auditioned, and that David and Paul were open and supportive of me trying to do that again, and even like inviting to the possibility of me leaving school to work with somebody else. I mean, it takes an insane amount of humility and pride to do
Yeah.
that, and I'll never forget that. I mean, in fact, I've had students that have worked with me who are like, "Hey, what do you think about me auditioning for Curtis?" And I'm like, "Well, it would be pretty hypocritical for me to say no,
Right. Exactly.
but I would have to be honest and say that I'd be pretty bummed if you left."
Yeah.
But anyway, so but onward, Curtis, the the by far the most magical Hogwarts-like place I could
Right.
have gone to study music. It was perfect for me in every way, including it being in Philadelphia because I didn't have any money, didn't have any car, didn't have clothes. I slept on a bare mattress my my first semester. Where I guess my family scraped together some cash to get me a bed as my holiday present. You know,
Yeah.
so. But anyway, that's a great city to be in if you don't have money.
Right.
And God, what a cool institution. And the two people like I have to thank, the most for any success I have, I can attribute to them. Um, and working with Edgar, I mean, that's just so amazing. I'll get to Hal in a second, but Edgar is such an amazing person to work with because he has such a subtle way of inviting you into the world of his genius. And I guess from experience, I always used to cringe when some of my best friends, who don't work with him, go to Aspen and play for him in a master class, and then they're just like, oh well, I don't know. I didn't really get much out of working with Edgar. He gave me a bunch of fingerings, and I was always very quick to like try to correct them. I'm like, you should check those out very seriously because there is such a strong profundity to the decisions that he's made for his own playing and the ones he made on the spot for you and your instrument and how to make this, unaccompanied Bach, you know, that much more musically potent. It's all intertwined. He is a master craftsman in addition to, a genius performer, I think. But yeah, working with him was like, it really is like, I feel like some of the material we covered is like the final frontier of, of bass playing. I mean, some of the things that he's doing with his left hand are just like, I think it's so cool. It's
Yeah.
so cool. It's so him, and I hope that in the future we can get as many people exposed to it as possible. Um,
For sure.
then there's Hal, and he's the kind of guy. There was one time I had to bring my bass into Mike Shank, who lives roughly I think an hour and 45 to 2 hours depending on traffic from Philly. And the bass was big enough and heavy enough that I didn't want to try to take it on an Amtrak, to go and get repaired, and I didn't know how long it was going to need to stay there. But I guess Hal wanted to bring in one of like the shop basses that the school has, and he didn't have the time to do it, so he's like, "Here, I'm going to loan you my car." There I am driving Hal's Honda Odyssey
Nice.
to the middle of the state to get these bases looked at. But he's just such a mensch. I mean, like, I don't know. It's a profound influence to me for a teacher to be that sacrificing for the well-being of the people that you're working with and for, specifically the students. And it's something I don't take lightly, and it's something I hope to pay forward. I've already, talked to him about, like, is there anything I can do for you? Like, I mean, specifically after my grad recital, I was like, it just means so much to me that, I got to spend all these years with you guys, and I learned so much. And, I mean, is there anything I can do for you, or, do anything going forward? And he's like, yeah, well, the only thing you can do is just pay it forward. And, there's, you can't pay me back for this. I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. But anyway, yeah, how's such an amazing orchestral force too. I mean, I don't know um, how many people who check out your podcast have heard the Philly Orchestra in person live. But Hal's usually one of the more he's one of the more animated cats in the band, let's just say. And he's just, I mean, he's like glued to the conductor, no matter who that is. And he has just such an authoritative presence. I mean, it's a very inspiring thing to see him, you know, playing an orchestra. I mean, but not even limited to. I mean, I've heard him play like Jack and the Beanstalk, that what is that, John Deek piece?
Yeah, right.
I mean, and he's like one of the most theatrical dudes there is. And anyway, everything about him I love, and I can't sing his praises enough. And I guess the most recent thing I can add to my upbringing and education, and who I can also attribute like a large degree of success to, would be Matthew McDonald and Janne Saksala. I got into listening to the Berlin Phil a little later than most, which would be my the third and fourth year of being at Curtis. And I went and saw them actually the fifth year I spent there. I saw them play at Carnegie Hall. What was it, February 2012? And I mean, it was just so incredible. It was just a dress rehearsal. They weren't like running through the piece. They were just doing spots of it. And it wasn't even like the beginning of the symphony that caught my attention to like that tradition of play. It was actually the end of the symphony, when the organ enters, a full choir singing, and the orchestra still playing full volume. And you can still hear and feel that bass section, you know, even though all those entities are playing. And it doesn't sound like this, like, starting like a chainsaw or something to saw down a big like redwood tree or something. It sounds beautiful and open and rich, and I mean, full of life and character. It's so cool what they do.
Mm.
Anyway, so I was French bow up until that point, and saw them play, um, and was immediately like, okay, that's what I want to do now. So you know, I tried to get into the academy, was not successful. Luckily, right after school, um, and I guess 3 weeks after that audition was the New York Phil audition, which I was lucky enough to get some temporary work out of. And I stayed there for 2 years. But those 2 years, I took any relief week or vacation week I had and dedicated it to either finding, bass equipment, or, specifically German bows, or going to Germany and working with these guys. And I mean, it was so cool that they agreed to spend some time with me. I basically had to like pry like crazy to get their attention, and hit them from many angles. But yeah, working with them was obviously very, very amazing. And I played German bow almost exclusively now. I guess I still have to teach French bow, and I also am trying to figure out, how to play with the ease of French bow for, a lot of the rep that like Edgar plays, like kind of folk music influence, a lot of fast back and forth. Um, that's something a French bow can do a lot easier than German for sure.
Mm.
So that's still something I'm trying to translate over, and I'm not sure if it's possible, but that's where I am now. So huge influence from Matt and Yana, and huge shout out to them. They're amazing, and thank you, thank you, thank you.
So you're at that point, and you're working with the Philharmonic. You got these 2 years where you're working with them, going and studying and making that switch to German bow. And what happened next?
Oh, so next is where I am currently. So right at the end of those 2 years, I was lucky enough to land on my feet at the Met. I guess there was a delay. This guy, Marvin Topolsky, retired from the Met, I think 3 years prior to them having an audition, maybe two. But yeah, I know there was like a little bit of a delay. And then they had this audition right as I was leaving the New York Phil, and I was just lucky enough to grab it alongside of Brendan Kane. We were the 2014 Rooks. But so that's where I've been. This is my fifth season, I believe, and fourth season as principal.
One of the great bass players of all time, Fred Zimmerman, former principal bass of the New York Philharmonic. He was Barry Kolstein of Kolstein Music. He was Barry's bass teacher. Here's Barry on Fred Zimmerman.
Anybody that knew Fred would say he was one of a kind. I mean, the man was probably the most talented, the most giving. He was the most interesting. Not only was he an amazing teacher, an amazing performer, he was an amazing artist also. He was truly a great artist.
Along with Fred Zimmerman, people like Milt Hinton, Homer Mensch, Orrin O'Brien, and so many others have had their basses worked on at Kolstein's or had instruments made for them by Kolstein's. Thank you, Barry, for everything that you've done for the bass world. And folks, check them out at Kolstein.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. What is an American style of bass? Here's Gary and Eric from Upton Bass on the topic.
So there's a joke about American instruments, all right? If I can take 4 violins and go to, let's say, a top-notch violin appraiser, and he can take the first one out and look at it and go, well, this one's clearly Italian because of all these features. Next one, oh, this is French because of all these features. Next one, no, this is English because of these features. Fourth violin, they can't tell what it is, and then they go, it's American. It's got a little bit of everything.
Learn more about their Bostonian, American style model, and so many other things that they have to offer you at uptonbass.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. They offer high-quality, custom ebony C extensions with 2 different chromatic latch options. Handmade ebony latches with adjustable aluminum mounts by New Harmony Music, or adjustable brass latches by Rob Anzalotti. Give the Bass Violin Shop a call to discuss your extension needs. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. So what's that job like? Big question, but what's the experience of being principal bass of the Met? What's it like being a member of the opera orchestra, of the bass section, and playing that fantastic repertoire? Just tell me about that job.
So maybe I'll unpack the rep first, and I guess the huge difference would be like instead of your normal, maybe 2-hour service in a symphony orchestra, that gets bumped up to 3 and change really quick. Literally, like rather than, you have an overture, a concerto, an intermission, and then a symphony. You have 3 acts of an opera that adds up to like 3.5 hours every night. So that's
Right.
that's a huge change, and certainly can be exhausting, but also can be really, really fun and rewarding, because opera is a really, really ultimate art form.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'd say probably the biggest difference between, like, for those of you who have never played opera before, the biggest difference between symphony and opera would be that, especially the moments that are maybe more symphonic and you're not just kind of following a singer. As soon as the singers and the production get mixed in, I mean, it just throws a wrench into everything, and you have to be so flexible and you have to listen so carefully to what's going on stage and look at the conductor like you've never looked before. I mean, it really, things move very suddenly because, all of a sudden the pitches aren't the most important thing, you know, to have happening in an opera. It's often, more often than not, especially in, Verdi, you know, who's written very sparsely at times. The drama is what's most important on stage. What's on stage is the premier thing to sell. So yeah, I would say that, like, as soon as the singer starts taking time, I mean, everything's got to slow down. As soon as the singer wants to move something along, or the conductor, that's when things have to move along, and all of a sudden, like, rhythm does this, like, tie-dye time warp, and it's like everything inverts, and I don't know, it can be, like, really challenging sometimes when it's, like, on the edge of, like, predictable and not. But it also is really cool to listen to the product afterwards and be like, oh, wow, I really did that when we did it, because I was really annoyed that we didn't get to finish what we were doing. We just had to jump right in. Like, for example, right now, we're doing Otello with Dudamel, and this is actually his premiere at the Met. And I guess the first couple of shows, he was anticipating copious applause after Desdemona's aria in Act 4, um, which is the aria that is right before the famous bass soli. And usually there is applause, but some nights it works perfectly enough that the audience continues to listen to everything that happens after the aria. There's a short pause, and then we come in, and there's no applause. Um, One of the things that we've had to be flexible to is we usually expect the applause. If it doesn't come immediately, Gustavo usually tries to go right into it. However, sometimes it's slightly delayed, so he's on an upbeat, and then people start clapping, and then we what's it called in baseball, a check swing, when you're like about to swing it. Oh, nope, not going to swing at that pitch, right?
Right.
So I mean, that's just like one of the instances. Or like Yannick has been doing Traviata with us. We actually just closed our last performance of it with him last night, and there's an aria, I don't remember the name of it, in the third act, that has a big repeat, and I guess we've had some pretty hardcore fans come to the Met who know we usually don't play the repeat, or it's not actually written a repeat, it's just written twice. And they usually applaud after the first verse and don't wait for the second. So what do you do when we start playing the second verse, which has the same intro as the first one, and people are clapping through it? He usually just cuts us off. He points at the oboe and he says, "From your solo." Boom. Yeah.
Wow.
And we have to just kind of know where the oboe plays that solo, which notes we play in the chord. And I mean, it's very on the spot. It's almost improvised, like, especially with Yannick. I mean, everything is different, and always in the moment. It's been very cool working with him on a lot of this stuff. But anyway, I'd say that's the big difference between playing opera and and playing symphonies. Symphonies seem like so much more densely calibrated and seemingly inflexible, even for ring cycle stuff, which is so epically symphonic. I mean, it's like interwoven like you wouldn't believe. The second the singer gets the idea that, oh, this needs to go forward, I need to be more angry about this, or, oh, no, I need to relax into this state of ecstasy, blah, blah, blah. Like we witness this all the time. You just have to take whatever your priorities are with the piece with like a grain of salt, because things are gonna change. They're gonna change, and then they'll change again.
Wow.
So anyway, that's how I describe the rep and just playing in an opera. Being principal has been very, very cool. I just want to say how humbled I am by the opportunity. It's such an amazing experience to get to lead some of this stuff and to be able to have the privilege of making some of these decisions. But I'd say, just as a description of what the job I think actually is mostly counting, mostly knowing the rep, just enough to make sure that, for people who might be confused, or, for people who are distracted by something, there's all sorts of stuff going on during these shows. I mean, it's truly wild. What comes to mind is maybe like the pilot episode of Breaking Bad when Walter White is driving that RV that has a chemistry set inside of it.
Yep.
That's about how chaotic it is sometimes.
Wow, it's pretty chaotic.
I mean, it literally is like, the ensemble's kind of unzipping, but it's like, so is what's going on stage. So how are we going to bring this all together? Okay, I'm just going to try to interpret like as close to what I see in the conductor, even though it's a little bit farther ahead than the voice. It's like, it's nuts. But anyway, I think mostly what the job of principal is in in an opera is taking initiative in carving out comfort and, I guess, best trying to set tempos that are predictable for your colleagues in the pit and on stage, and setting dynamics as carefully and as practically as you can. I mean, there's sometimes when we look at, pianissimo, I mean, even for something like Rigoletto or Traviata, like some of Verdi's mid-period works, where it's just like, no way.
Yeah, right.
Like that's not happening. There's no way. I mean, unless it like comes directly from the conductor, it's like, no, we have to do this very specifically. It's like, it's almost like what you see from the conductor is equally as important as what you see on the page. So, I don't know. I just try to be as prepared as possible, and to really carve out as much opportunity for us to have fun playing as much as possible, because as soon as people feel comfortable enough to play, I mean, and that can't always be the case. I mean, sometimes, we're asked to walk on eggshells and play, very tentatively and extremely quiet, and it doesn't always, it's not exactly my thing to do that. I always want predictability and tempo. I mean, with exceptions, but yeah, I'd say the job is mostly, I'm determined to find more comfort for my section, and just more opportunities to play out or play in, like whatever, just to be as theatrical as possible back there. Because another fact about the Met is that the pit is an elevator, and the bass section generally sits high enough that you can see the audience, can see some of our heads and some of our scrolls and stuff. So when we're animated, people tend to notice. I've actually been stopped on the street by, random passerbys who've given me notes or comments, or asked me questions about, why was I laughing during this Turandot, performance where, such and such was singing. I was like, oh, I remember that. It's because the guy was singing a high note and, hitting a gong at the same time. But, he had to turn his body to hit the gong but he had to sing through the high note. So it was like that scene in the first Ace Ventura movie where he's like using that sliding glass door. It's like, I mean, it was really goofy, and I thought it was very funny.
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Did you know that you can tell the difference between D'Addario strings by the silking? Peg and silking denotes pitch and tension. So E is green, A is black, D is yellow, and G is red. C, by the way, is purple if you have a C string. A thin band of yellow just before the metal winding denotes light tension, and a thin orange band of silking denotes heavy tension. Ball end silking, that's the stuff down by the tailpiece, denotes string family like Kaplan, Helicore, or Zyx. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass. And Steve travels far and wide here in the Western United States. Here's Steve on where he goes and what some of the benefits of being able to travel like that are.
You travel with it. You're going up to Oregon. You're going up to Seattle.
Up to Seattle,
yeah.
And back, out to Arizona, wherever people want to see a selection, they don't have options, or if I have a line on some bases I want to check out and maybe buy or trade, I have the option. That's the beauty of me not being tied to a workbench in a shop.
Steve works with some of the San Francisco Bay Area's best professional bass luthiers, people like Nathaniel Rich, Alex Friedman, and many others to get basses playing beautifully. When someone comes to me asking where to look for a bass, whether they're a student or professional, or they're coming through town and they want to try out a great selection of basses, I always send them to Steve. Learn more at steveswanstringbass.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Steve. So you have this incredible job, this ever-changing tapestry. I love the image of Walter White driving the RV down, and I can feel the excitement and chaos and what that must be like. But then, so you got this job. So how did you get this job? Auditioning, right? So a many faceted topic for sure. And then you're listening to auditions both at the Met and at your job at Juilliard.
Well, maybe a couple things to know about the Met audition, because that actually kind of dictates a lot of how the preparation goes. But actually, since we're talking about it, how about the process first? A couple facts that people should know is that there's a rumor that the Met has a policy against these no hires that happen periodically in the industry. That's not entirely true, but it is kind of true. We have a policy that if any single candidate makes it to the final round of any given audition, I guess with the exception of concertmaster, which is a whole different process and doesn't really count for my comment here. Any applicant, if any applicant makes it to the final round of any audition except for concertmaster, the Met, and this is, I guess, a double negative, but it's the correct way to say this, the Met cannot have a no hire. We have to hire. So that's, it's a small loophole, I guess, that's a possible escape route if for some reason things weren't working out and we thought that, we were scratching our heads about, humoring any of the applicants. There is an escape route, but there's never been a no hire at the Met, so it's kind of true. Another fact would be that the Met prides itself in a completely blind process. We vote on these, numbered candidates, and we vote to hire a random number, candidates. We say, okay, we think number 2 is the best, and do we want to have a runner-up? Yes. Who would the runner-up be? Number 16. That's the way it works. And then our personnel manager says, okay, So you've elected to hire number 2 as a blah, 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 and number 16 as a runner-up. These people are, then we know who they are. And we don't know anything until then. I guess following up with a lot of the discussion about, gatekeepers in these auditions and a lot of the topics of conversation about the Bass Boys article and, how to adequately represent, the population that is playing the instrument right now and wants to play professionally. I'd say the Met's answer to that is probably, or hopefully, adequate, because it's truly blind. It's about the playing and simply nothing else. I'm actually really happy with the way that the auditions run. Everybody seems to be simply, objective about everything, and they want as fair of a process as possible, because that usually helps the 10-year probation a lot, because it's like there was no foul play, no discussion, no nothing. It's very, very cut and dry the way we hire. I guess a couple other little things. We have asked for tapes in the past. I don't think that's going to be going anywhere, just because, this last audition we had over 200 applications. The Met is not equipped to listen to that many people for a live audition. It's just, I mean, if you think about how much is going on in the Opera House, and then you have this little tiny zit that is the bass audition. It's just a logistics problem. So we do, unfortunately, have to ask for tapes sometimes. However, we take them very seriously. We listen to them blindly. That's first off. We have a committee formed to listen to those tapes and vote anonymously. It's something to take seriously. If you do apply for the Met and we ask for a tape, there's usually a reason. And, just know that, if you do a good job, you will likely be invited. And a fun fact is that, there are many people in the orchestra currently who were asked to make tapes. I mean, a great example would be Kingsley Wood. He's one of the bass players in the Met section, and he's also the assistant personnel manager. He had to make a tape, even though he was in a Nixon orchestra, and he still got the gig. In fact, he said to me that people who are usually asked to make tapes, who make them and succeed and are invited to the prelim audition, usually do very well in the audition. So please, for anybody listening that this would be relevant, take it seriously, because we take it seriously. Another fun fact, we never ask for complete works. I don't really think it's so necessary, especially, I mean, if you just look at the practicality of, if we had an audition list that just said Rosenkavalier on it.
Right.
I mean, there's just passage work littered everywhere. There's so many things in that opera. I mean, just from a counting perspective, like there's so many things we could ask that would be like, oh, the person counted wrong next.
Right.
It just doesn't make much sense. I mean, I once described this in a lesson to Yana, who was asking about like American orchestra auditions and, about some of these like complete works, and, because I guess they tend to ask for similar things, but they also are specific in the excerpts that they want to hear. And maybe it's a word of mouth thing. It's been a while since I've taken their audition, but he was like, so let me get this straight. When they ask you to learn Beethoven 7, 9, and 5 for an audition, you're expected to know, 4 hours of material just there. And to be able to play any of it at any moment perfectly. I'm like, yeah, I guess that's right. And I've heard, even from my former personnel manager at the New York Phil, he's like, no, we do this because everybody who, is actually contending for a job here tends to know, or should know, what the passages in these pieces are asked for, or which ones are asked. And maybe to learn some of the material around them, just in case if one of these passages is asked with like an atypical beginning. But that's not literal. it really is not. And I think, I just like to take a quick stand for a second. I mean, when you ask for something, people prepare that something. I mean, if you ask for a whole movement of Mozart, I mean, people are going to learn every single note in that movement of the symphony. And I think there's like merit in asking for this specifically to like, okay, we want to throw you a curveball. Here are the parameters of that. I think that's great. Otherwise, I mean, it's kind of it's a burden that I don't think, at least for the Met, is not going to really yield the results we want. Because if we ask for, Meistersinger, that's a 6 hour and 15-minute opera. I guess, okay, so minus the 2 40-minute intermissions, like how is that going to work?
Right, right.
It's not. It's just not. No way, no how. So I guess more onto that would be the Met has a tradition of asking for excerpts only. I have an opinion or two about that, but we still have only asked for excerpts. And it's about 16. They're concise. I think a couple lists in the past have been 14 or 15, or some even 13. I've looked at a bunch of them. I guess one of my friends and colleagues, Brad Aikman, calls it the diamond because he says it's a small list, but it's like packed.
Yeah.
Just absolutely packed with all this stuff. I think it's a really excellent audition to take. I mean, obviously there were the ones that I was actually successful at, so I'm like, oh yeah, it's a great audition. But I think we try to be as absolutely fair and as respectful to the applicants as possible. And I hope as many people out there are encouraged to take it because we look forward to listening to all the talent, frankly. So now that that's out of the way, you asked me maybe what advice I would have for people taking auditions, or what I could say about my own success in this audition.
Yeah, take us through. Yeah, this audition, other auditions. What are some of those breakthroughs and aha moments and discoveries that you've had that you'd like to share?
I do have a couple, but they're really um, simple.
Yeah.
And they are a little bit disputed. A lot of people get asked this question, and I think it's always really important for people to hear how many, people interviewed answer the question, what to do in an audition. How many people who are asked that question usually answer with, well, frankly, it comes down to accuracy and, how good the playing is. I think it's important to recognize that because honestly, it shows you how many people think it's important that the playing level just generally needs to be very high. You need to play in time and in tune, and you need to show, competence in that way. However, I would take, whatever the yin or is to the yang in that circumstance, where I would say that's true. However, who cares?
Right.
I mean, at a certain point, taking something like the Beethoven 9 recitative, there are people in high school that can play the notes for that extremely accurately. However, it's so not the point.
Right.
Like, that's not why we ask for that excerpt. And yes, if one applicant versus another, if one of them, absolutely dogs out on a couple notes and, like has a huge meltdown versus somebody who played the notes without, ruining the presentation. Yeah, sure. The person who didn't mess up won, for sure. And the people who don't mess up will often usually be in the final rounds. And frankly, that says a lot. I just want to steer people, if I could be influential for a second, towards the things beyond accuracy. because I think so much is placed on this, like, playing perfectly in tune and perfectly in time. We are imperfect beings, and that's just not possible, objectively speaking. In fact, the people listening to you, like, often may not even pay attention to that stuff.
Right.
Or might not even know what perfect rhythm is for a passage, or might not hear things the same way you do. So it's just a subjective thing, and to devote 100% of your time to it is, I think, a mistake. What I try to do in auditions is to distract from that as much as possible, because the second you make it a presentation about how clean you play, the second you fail to play perfectly cleanly, that's when people start listening to how many times you missed an articulation, or, start counting your rhythm, or start trying to figure out, if you're playing sharp or flat. Again, it's so not the point. And especially when you get into the gig, you're gonna mess up. You're gonna mess up big. Like, it's gonna happen. It's happened to me so many times. Like, I mean, even on HD recordings. I mean, luckily we have like a great team that'll like kind of doctor my blemishes. But like, seriously, it's, I don't know. It's something that, if it's there, somebody's playing like with really bad rhythm, or just bad rhythm, or somebody is having like a lot of trouble playing in tune. Yes, it's very obvious in an audition. We're looking for somebody who's playing at a very high level. Don't think that, it's like not important to not spend time on it. But seriously, like, I view it in three ways, like, at least, for, going beyond, what accuracy would be in an audition. And it's how you sell yourself, how you sell bass playing, and how you sell the rep that you're playing. Because to critical people listening to your playing, I think it's fair to say, in terms of this like theater that you bring, to your performance, like who you are in this equation. Who are you, and why should I listen? Like, 'cause, like, take, I guess for my audition, you have something like Rigoletto. There's a solo in the first act. It's famous. It's challenging to play it in tune, and to play with, I guess, good enough technique that you can show shape to the notes, but also not be, I guess, swelly, like, or late with your bow changes and your weight distribution in the right hand, or also to show that kind of delay or lack of anticipation in the left hand, where the vibrato can tend to go da dee da dee da dee da, like, those could be like doctored to sell in a really good way, rather than, some of those aspects of playing being synonymous with a technical problem. So in terms of this theater, what's going on? This character Sparafucil is telling, Rigoletto, basically, he's an assassin, and he's open for business, and Rigoletto's daughter, I guess, falls in love with somebody who he doesn't like very much, and the guy's saying, I can fix that for you. So there's like a tension to the passage that I think, needs to be brought out, in the way, maybe a little extra pressure in the sustain would yield like a little bit more tension in the sound, or a little bit faster vibrato would show like a little angst, or a little, in discomfort or something. Anything to really bring the listener into, I'm saying something to you, you shouldn't correct my grammar while I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
I guess a good example in the symphony audition would be like a Hinastera or something, or even a Mahler 1. It just simply is not adequate to get through the notes. You got to do something. I mean, they're hiring you for a pretty significant moment in Mahler 1, which I've had the the opportunity to perform one time in Carnegie with the Met Orchestra. It was probably the scariest experience of my life. I thought I was going to have like a coronary.
Oh, no.
It's not necessarily what you say, but it's how you say it. I'm just hoping people take the opportunity to really be expressive with this stuff and not just be okay with, okay, the notes were fine. You know, the notes say enough. No, not necessarily. Which would bring me to my next thing. Uh, the music. Why are we playing this still? You know, these pieces might be 200 years old. Why again? Um, if you don't develop a sense of connoisseurship for like why these pieces are so special and why they're so unique and you know why they have to be heard, you know, even now after all of these years and after you know musical commercialism has like swept the industry. I mean, now we can listen to this stuff, you know, like at the click of a button at any given moment that our iPhone or whatever handheld device is charged. Why again? Take for example, like I mean, something like Beethoven 9 Recitative. There's so much in there, you know, aside from you know the angst of like the outcry of the fourth movement's first chord, you know, that D minor chord with a B flat on top of it in the brass, and why Beethoven wrote that. The fact he was, you know, completely deaf already, and I guess he was conducting this completely impractical work, you know,
Right.
and then he decides to reference each of the themes from all of the movements, including the first movement, the second movement, the third movement, and then at the end with the Ode to Joy leading into the actual movement. And why a recitativo in the cello bass section, no words, you know, and then later a baritone. So there's so much meaning to that. And there's so much beyond the notes. You know what I'm saying? Like it just like it's almost like a crime to think it's like, oh, like just got to play clean, nice and in time and in tune and get the gig, you know? It's like when we asked for it, you know, I specifically wanted to hear people's opinions about like, what is this piece? How should it be played? What can you bring to the table given, you know, who you are and what you're playing on? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe something else, you know, specifically to the opera world would be the excerpt from Falstaff. Falstaff, at the beginning of the third act, is coming out of the River Thames. And this is supposed to be kind of a musical Mickey Mouse moment where he's shivering. So it's not a difficult passage to play. It is a very difficult passage to play it musically informed, which is like slow enough to actually sound like shivers and soft enough that it's like really intense and dry enough that you can really hear every note and it actually sounds like, you know?
Yeah.
It's usually very funny. So anyway, that's one of the tests of Falstaff for sure. It's like, I mean, do you know what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. The last thing would be is, you know, the most obvious is craftsmanship, and you know how you're selling bass playing. What about bass playing is there to know, and what about it is so cool that I should be checking it out, or you know, seeing or just investigating what you're doing right now. You know, it's I guess so evident in maybe a passage like the Beethoven 5 Trio, and I actually have a funny story about this.
Yeah.
Like just the direction from you know, going right into the dominant like that. In the third measure minus the anacrusis. Just that direction gives so much lilt to the passage, but it does take a lot to kind of factor in, you know, whatever bow stroke you're going to use to make that crescendo, because technically you're going off the string, And I mean, a lot of people actually go more on as you go into the top G, right?
Right.
And I guess the funny story is that, that's the way Hal teaches all of us to do it, to really get that direction. It's a really easy tool to just lengthen slightly to make it sound bigger as the passage goes. There was a very famous bass pedagogue in New York. I guess I'll leave this like kind of ambiguous enough, who suggested that doing that would get me, I guess nixed from an audition, or I get the big next after I do something like that. I'm like, well, I got hired at the Philharmonic, so
Right.
I don't really know what to say to that. Obviously
Yeah.
they didn't hear it and they didn't think it was a problem. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's something I think is like a really clever way to like kind of weave in these kinds of gestures and, this kind of musical impetus into your technical preparation, right?
Absolutely.
And then I guess something in the opera world, which I thought was very important to ask for, would be either of the Rosenkavalier excerpts that we asked for last time. I mean, they're just so manic in the way that they change character, dynamic, articulation, like so instantaneously and so specifically that, anybody who, would just kind of blow through without actually looking into like how cool that passage can sound when like let's take the second act. I think it was the first of the excerpts that we asked for. It's like this. It's like a very sudden, drop from piano to pianissimo.
Yeah.
Something as small as that, or take the difference between Brahms' Second Symphony, Fourth Movement. It's piano, and it's piano only, right? So you have bum, ba-da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da. Then the next time you hear it, it's pianissimo. And, I played for one of my colleagues in the Philly Orchestra back in the day, and I mean, he suggested that that's a huge thing, in an audition. If you actually do this, you're going to win the audition. Like how many people actually show that difference? And I'm like, all right. Well,
Yeah.
and on the other side of the screen, it's like, okay, so I'm going to be playing next to somebody for how many years that potentially might not know either the difference or the importance of the difference of like what it is to play piano versus pianissimo. And what do
Yeah.
those words even mean? Like piano does not mean soft, forte does not mean loud. Piano means gentle, forte means strong. And there's so much more to interpret from that kind of stuff. Anyway,
Yeah.
I go way into this stuff, and I think it's important that people be encouraged as much as possible to go into it as well.
Rex, so great to chat with you, and just it's super inspiring to hear about all the levels that you're thinking at in terms of your own playing and auditioning and those details. And I just want to wrap up today. If you could go back and give young Rex, could be 18-year-old Rex, you can pick the age, but give young Rex some advice, what would that advice be?
I think the advice would be, to, I guess, not take things so seriously, and to, maybe spend some time outside of the practice room just working on things music related. I guess there's a famous Daniel Matsukawa quote. He's the principal bassoon of Philly Orchestra. It's something to the effect of, if music is a form of expression about life, if you don't have a life outside of it, what then do you have to say?
Yep.
Anyway, I thought that was profound and important, and I wish I would have, maybe lived a little bit more outside of it.
Rex, thank you so much for chatting. What a great conversation, and we definitely need to do this again in the future. Have a round 2 about so many topics. So I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to learn more about auditioning, and obviously we talked about way more than auditioning, but if you do want to learn about that, if you go to contrabassconversations.com/auditioning, that will bring up all the audition-related episodes that we put out, like recent audition winners. I like to talk to them. We did that whole series, Winning the Audition, back a couple of years ago with, I don't even remember, 30 different bass players and their thoughts on auditioning. So you can do that. And kind of a behind-the-scenes trick is you can do that with just about any topic. contrabassconversations.com/jazz/teaching/luthiers will bring up that topic. So if you want to dig deep into one specific area, that's a great way to do it. Thank you, Rex. Thank you to everybody who's listening. Thank you to you, whether you're on your treadmill right now or walking the dog or driving to work or warming up before you dive into your practice session. Thanks for listening. I get such pleasure out of doing this show, and I learned so much in the process, and being able to put it out to the wider world is just an extra bonus to me. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. If you're looking for a bass or you're looking for some bass work done, Mitch is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and great guy, and definitely check him out, mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper for going through and cataloging and organizing all the topics that we talk about in these episodes. That's what makes it possible to do best of episodes and highlights and thematic episodes. So thank you to Krista and the whole team. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.